Hey everybody, Charles from GMATNinja here, GMAT Club's resident verbal expert and Adam Sandler lookalike. I'm going to leave at least 3 or 4 Adam Sandler references in today's broadcast just for you guys. So this is series number 4, video number 4, the end of our little series on reading comprehension. Now today's video is about if you're going for a super high score on GMAT verbal, what do you do? So what do you go from something like high 30s, maybe a 40, up into the mid 40s? And it's actually a really common archetype among our students. We see a lot of people these days who are walking in the door with a 700 or even a 720 or 730. Their goal is something like a 760. 10 years ago, this never happened because what we could say to applicants was just get us a 700 and shut up, go apply. You'll be happy. It's fine. The world's lost its mind. There's abuse of the GMAT going on. So a 760 for a lot of applicants buys you something that a 720 doesn't. So what I'm going to talk about in the beginning today is what does it take to get to something like a 760 just in the lens of reading comprehension? What do we expect out of you? What is it you can do differently to get there? Now, these aren't going to be tips that I think are going to be super useful for somebody who's scoring in the 20s right now or the low 30s. A lot of this is going to be geared towards somebody who's pushing 90th percentile on verbal, but you just want that little bit of an extra lift. And what is it that you want to think about? What is it you want to track in your data to help yourself get there? As always, these are always live, so no pausing, no edits, no snack breaks, lots of technical difficulties. So people who are watching this live, please punch stuff into the comments. I've been doing one-on-one tutoring since the late 90s now. So I thrive off of the feedback and the questions. So I'm going to keep an eye on that and do everything I can to accommodate the questions you guys have. So I'll go through some general tips and some general principles that we use on our students that are trying to go from something like a 700 to a 760 and need help on reading comprehension. And then we're going to go through a passage or two, and these are going to be really tough ones. So again, if you struggle on these, no shame in that at all. All right. So first 3 videos of this series, we popped up kind of 6 core principles of reading comprehension. Again, I'm not going to rehash that today. If you missed that first video, I strongly suggest you go back and watch it at least those first 15 minutes. Even if you're scoring well, watch it at 1.5 or 2 times speed just to get a sense of what I'm talking about in terms of process and thinking about process elimination and thinking about reading for purpose and kind of avoiding some of the gimmicks that are out there. All of that stuff's going to apply no matter how good you get. The gimmicks actually get less and less and less valuable. So we see all kinds of things out there. I've had people draw little aliens and say, well, I'm writing details in here, and then there's all these things kind of sprouting up from it. And there's all kinds of things. There's all kinds of little platitudes and all kinds of little acronyms. Hey, if you're scoring in the high 30s and you're trying to get to the mid 40s, something like that on verbal, gimmicks, pictures, not going to do it for you. You need something that's frankly much pure, simpler in a way, in the sense of there's not a lot of bells and whistles that are going to help you. Hard in another way where we really have to demand a ton out of you. So when we talk about something like a 760, odds are pretty good that you need to be scoring in the mid 40s on verbal or darn close to it, depending obviously on your quant score. Couple thoughts here. One is that to get up there, you just don't have room to miss very much at all. So we need you nearly bulletproof on verbal. So reading comprehension, we might be looking at something like 80, 85, 90, 95%, depending on exactly what that homework set looks like. So really high levels of accuracy. You can never miss anything that's easy for you. So we're looking for a ton of precision at that level. And that's unfortunate. And one of the realities, if you're going for that 750, 760 kind of score, is it gets really sensitive to a couple errors here and a couple of errors there. And you're very likely, when we see people are scoring in the mid 40s, you see a fair amount of instability from test to test just because 1 or 2 questions might swing that score by a couple points. That's just the reality. The GMAT is not designed to distinguish very well between somebody who's at a 760 and a 740. So sometimes it's this wafer thin margin. So when we talk about trying to get somebody to that level, we're saying, all right, we're going to do everything we can to make sure you're mind-numbingly consistent. You're the very best you can be. And then luck is still going to play a little role there between a 740 and a 760, unfortunately. All right, so thing number 1, and I kind of mentioned this in passing in the previous videos, LSAT is your best friend if you're really pushing for that super high verbal score. Is it exactly like the GMAT? No, the passages are longer. The passages are a little bit harder. That's a good thing. That's what you want, right? So you want to do something that's hard. It's kind of like the baseball analogy for anybody who's a baseball fan. You see guys in the on-deck circle swinging weighted baseball bats, right? They're swinging a bat that's harder than the one they're actually going to swing when it really counts. Same idea with the LSATs. Denser language, Generally, you're going to get these passages that are somewhere between around 50% longer than the average GMAT passage. So it really tests your ability to focus. It tests your ability to apply consistent technique and think about purpose and think about how these things connect to each other. So really, really good in that sense. One of the things I've mentioned in previous videos, think of GMAT reading comprehension, and you could say something similar about sentence correction and critical reasoning. 2 dimensions of difficulty. One is, this language is hard. I'm struggling to understand what this says. Dimension number 1. LSAT really, really, really helps you with that. Second dimension, right answers that look wrong, wrong answers that look right. That's why we talk about process elimination done in a very pure way. That's why I always model it as best I can in these videos. So those are the 2 ways that you can struggle. LSAT's really going to help you with that first one. It's a slow burn. You do 3 sets. It's not going to cause any magic, but over time, it's going to help you because you're working with stuff that's harder than what you're going to see on your GMAT exam. Secondly, there's not technically limitless. There's a nearly limitless supply of LSATs for all intents and purposes, more than you would ever do. I want to say there's 80 or 90 LSATs in print. Every LSAT has 25 reading comp questions on it. Fantastic. That's exactly what you want. So we've got a couple thousand. Great. You're not going to get through them all if you're studying for the GMAT. And one of the reasons I push the LSAT so hard for people who are shooting for that mid 700s kind of score is, hey, the GMAT official guides, let's face it, there are not a lot of questions in there for reading comprehension. You can work through those pretty quickly in a few weeks if you really wanted to, and then what? And I want you doing official questions, always, always, always on verbal. These testing companies spend $3,000 or more developing each individual question. No disrespect to test prep companies. People who run test prep companies think they write good questions. Don't use my questions either for reading comprehension. Just not the real thing. LSAT, vetted, a lot of effort goes into them. Absolutely worth using. It's a good way for you to stretch your supply of GMAT materials. One way we typically have people use it who we know have a shot at that mid 700s kind of score. You start with a lot of LSAT, and then as time goes on to get closer to your GMAT test, you transition, start mixing the GMAT in a little bit. Admittedly, those passages feel a little bit different. They're testing the same exact skills: precision of your reading, precision of your process elimination, precision of your reasoning, your ability to hone in on what does the author really, really want from me? What's the purpose here? Same skills, feel different, but I swear it's the same skills. So start with the LSAT, use that to stretch it out through your studying so that you can use some of those GMAT materials as you get closer to your test. And then data is the other big reason. So every LSAT section is roughly the same difficulty and length as all of the others. So that's a great thing. One of the problems with the GMAT, and one of the things that we hear all the time, people ask us all the time on the GMAT Club forums, hey, my accuracy on the official guide questions is 90% or 75% or whatever the number is. How am I doing? And we go, well, it depends on which questions you're doing. So in the official guides, roughly, I don't think the official guides necessarily do a great job of this, but the idea is that they go roughly from easier to harder. It's not perfect. So if you're doing the first 50 questions out of the official guide, those are a heck of a lot easier than the last 50. So if you say I'm at 80%, I go, well, that doesn't mean anything to me, because if it's on the easiest ones, that's pretty good, but it's not going to get you to a 700 or a 750. If it's on the last 50 questions, yeah, maybe that is really good. LSAT provides you with that really, really consistent data. And if you are going for that super, super elite score, we need that data. It's absolutely critical that you let your prep be anchored in the data. It is so easy on the GMAT. One of the things we see every day, people contact us and say, hey, here's what I think my problems are. And we go, cool, we want to hear that. But now get us your data, get us your practice tests, get us your ESRs. We want to see what happens here. We're going to give you some diagnostics. We want to see what you really look like. And half the time, the test taker's own analysis of their struggles doesn't match the data really well at all. That's really, really common. It's hard. It's really hard to look at your own performance and really know what's going on and really be honest with yourself about it. So LSAT provides a great consistent data stream. Every set is about the same difficulty, should take you about the same amount of time, which brings me to principle number 2. If you're shooting for that super high score, you need mind-numbing consistency. I want to see the same times roughly on every set. So I want to see maybe no more than 5 minutes of variation from set to set. If there's any more variation than that, it's you. You're doing something different, and you've got to figure out what is it that's driving you to read differently on one day versus another. Same idea with the accuracy, obviously. There's going to be a little bit of variation, but if one day you're at -8 on an LSAT section, next day you're -3, next day you're -1, then you're back to -11, you're in real trouble. We have no idea who you're going to be on test day. There's something underpinning that inconsistency that's you. It's not the LSAT that's driving that inconsistency. It's you. Is it that you're not sleeping well? You're not eating right? Maybe you're not getting enough exercise. Your brain's a little foggy. Maybe it's something external like that. Some days you get nervous. Maybe you've got a 2-year-old at home and the 2-year-old is banging on the walls or something. Great. Look at those external things, but also look at the things that are specific to how you're approaching those questions. Is there something in your technique, in your process? You're not consistently using process elimination. You're not consistently reading the same way and looking for purpose. So the joy of the LSAT is you get really consistent data that's easy to interpret in a sense, because you need it to be really consistent from set to set. And if it isn't, you know it's something that you're doing that's different. Question I'm getting from the live crowd: what is good on these LSAT sections if that's going to be one of the backbones of your study plan for reading comprehension or critical reasoning? In all honesty, what I usually say to our students is, if you can do an LSAT set in under an hour, you're probably going to be okay to finish up the GMAT. That's about right. The LSAT questions might take you a little bit longer than the GMAT ones, and that's okay. It washes out. What we typically see in the data from our students is, if a student is under 60 minutes per LSAT section of about 25 questions, and if they're able to get about 80% right, that generally sets them up to be right around a 40 on the verbal on the GMAT. And obviously I'm ignoring sentence correction for now. But that correlation is still pretty strong once we get done training our students in sentence correction as well. So 80% in under an hour gets you close to a 40. If you're right at that hour mark, you're probably going to have a little bit of a tough time finishing a GMAT verbal section on time, but you're going to be close. And then if you're going for something like a mid-40 score, 760, that's where I want to see something closer to 90% on those LSATs. And that is tough. That is really tough to do. So you might have noticed LSAT's time limit per section is 35 minutes. If you're taking the GMAT, don't worry about that. I just want you under an hour, and I want consistency. I don't want to see 45 minutes one day, 58 minutes the next. Hey, they're both under an hour. Yeah, but now I don't know who you are. You're not consistent. You're not applying consistent focus, consistent practices. That's a problem. So again, if you're shooting for elite on the GMAT verbal, I need to see mind-numbingly consistent results on those LSATs. One last question related to the big picture. I'm getting people asking about, well, I'm vacillating quite a bit between 41 and 45. Somebody else said 42 to 46. Yeah, some of that could be a couple different things. First of all, be really, really careful with non-official tests. And obviously, I've got limited information about the folks who are asking these questions. So assuming that these are on official MBA.com practice tests and that you're doing them for the first time, you only get 6 shots at them. So you don't have a ton there. And if you're seeing a lot of vacillation on your official tests and on your real tests, obviously between a 42 and a 46, that could be a few different things. That could be that your technique is inconsistent, that you're doing something a little bit differently from day to day. So that could be something that you're driving in some part, where some days you're sharper than others. Maybe there's something about your sentence correction that it kind of depends a little bit on what you see. You have weaknesses in some areas, and then it's a matter of luck. Let's say you're bad at parallelism, which you probably aren't if you're over 40 on your GMAT verbal score. But as an example, let's say that parallelism is just there's a black hole in your head where parallelism goes to die. Then some of the variability might be caused by that, because you could go take a GMAT exam, and out of your 36 verbal questions, maybe 13 are sentence correction, 12 or 13. And one test, you don't see any parallelism, the next one you do. So that could cause 4 points of variability very, very easily. Could be something in your focus, without a doubt. Could be something in your process that's inconsistent. But to be honest with you, a 42 to a 46, it sounds like a big gap. And in terms of what happens on your composite score, it is. It's significant, right? It's a really, really big deal. That might be the difference between a 730 and a 760, depending on your quant score. So in terms of admissions and your composite score, yeah, it's a big gap. The thing is, a 42 versus a 46, we might be looking at 3 or 4 questions. And it might just be a little bit of luck. And one of the things that test creators will talk about is measurement error, standard error of measurement. These tests aren't super precise. It's a 36 question sample of your verbal abilities. 6 of those, by the way, are experimental. So we've got 30 questions that are used to determine your verbal score. Little bit of bad luck of what you happen to see, that might be all that's driving the difference between a 42 and a 46. Now, if you are seeing a gap that big, I want you to really look hard at yourself and say, is there something that I can identify some other way about my performance? So I'll come back to the LSATs. So it could be you. One way to figure that out on reading comp and critical reasoning, if you're doing a bunch of LSAT sections, yeah, and you see -5 one day, -1 the next, and your times are blowing in the wind quite a bit, that's a sign that it's you and that your process needs tightening up, and you've got to figure out how to drill in and be exactly the same reader every single day. People are asking, where do we find these LSAT reading comps? LSAT, it's a standardized test that people take to get into American law schools. You can find those very, very easily. Go on Amazon. You can go on the LSAT website. There's a free LSAT up there. So very, very easy to buy those online. They don't have a lot of them in PDF form. Most of them you have to buy the printed book, but those we get shipped all over the world now. So shouldn't have any trouble getting those. Again, more than 80 LSAT tests in print. So you've got literally thousands of questions that you can draw on. Okay, last thing. Everybody hates this. So reality of reading comprehension. Yeah, hey, I can talk a blue streak about technique. We can draw these nice little gimmicky things with aliens. We can give you platitudes, acronyms. We can do all that stuff. We can say, oh, the LSAT's great practice. You can practice and practice and practice and do thousands and thousands of questions, and that's great. But at the end of the day, what's going to determine your ceiling is how good are your reading skills. And that's a big part of your ceiling. You might be underperforming your ceiling. We meet people all the time whose reading skills are fantastic. They're up here. Their GMAT scores are down here. What's going on? Their process is broken. They're skimming. They're reading. They're over-obsessing over details. They're not using process elimination. They're not being literal enough in how they read, even though they're capable of it, right? There's all kinds of behavioral things. It's a lot of what we've been talking about in this video series that might create a wedge between that ceiling, that's your actual reading skill, and your performance. So when we talk about test prep processes, things you can do to make your process better, that's closing that gap between your ceiling and your performance. That ceiling is determined by how good of a reader are you. We all read sentences sometimes that make our heads spin. You might have to read it twice, 6 times, and maybe even after reading it 6 times, you just don't get it. First passage I want to go through today, probably the only one we're going to go through today, that first sentence is a doozy. Most of you guys are going to struggle on it, and there is no shame in that. I had to read it 3 or 4 times myself, and I'm not saying that to be sympathetic and nice. I really did. It's a 46-word sentence. That's reality. Sometimes the density of language gets to be too much for us. Everybody has a ceiling. You give me something that's academic enough and convoluted enough, and my head's going to spin too. That's reality. So part of this is, where is your ceiling? So I get people all the time who say, hey, I'm at a 25 on verbal. I want a 45 on verbal. And I go, well, we can make your processes better. We can make you be more disciplined about process elimination. We can make you maybe a little more efficient in how you think about taking notes for how your individual brain works. Those are the kind of things you can do by preparing for tests, by studying for the GMAT, by learning better processes. But what we can't do very quickly is make you better at reading. That takes time. It can take a lot of time. That's reality. I've said it in every one of these videos. Nobody wants to hear it. I think I just saw 30 people from the live group leave because they want a trick that's going to make them a better reader overnight. Those tricks don't exist. You just have to read a whole lot. If you've only read 10 books in your whole life, cover to cover, you probably need to do more reading. Very, very, very slow burn. That takes time, unfortunately. One other question I'm getting about the big picture here of things that we want you to work on and how the LSAT might help is, can I use LSAT if your score is lower, between 30 and 35? Yeah, absolutely. And I think part of the benefit of using LSAT is just, again, I only want you using official questions for verbal. Quant, knock yourself out. Anything with Buñuel's name on it in the GMAT Club forum, use that. It's great. So non-official questions, you can still learn a lot from them. They might not be exactly the style of the real thing, but you still learn from doing quant questions, even if they're not official. As long as they're pretty good and get at something that's actually tested, you're great. Absolutely helps you. Verbal, official questions only. So one reason, even if you're scoring, let's say, below a 35 right now on GMAT verbal, good reason to use the LSAT is if you know you're going to be doing hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of questions, the GMAT official guides are limited. So LSAT's just one way to give you more reps, and it's fantastic for that. So even for our students who are scoring lower, we do use the LSATs. We might be less. So somebody's going for, let's say, who's at a 25, they want a 35, they'd be happy with a 650 composite. If we get somebody like that, maybe we're not being tyrants about, I I want 90% exactly every time. I mean, we're not being tyrants about that necessarily because they've got a little more leeway. But sure, we're going to use LSATs for those guys too, just because if they need more reps than they can get out of the official GMAT materials, LSAT might have some benefits. And especially if you're really interested in the data. So part of why we use it with our students is I just want to see, is this person consistent? And even if they're really struggling on the LSAT and they're missing 40% of the questions, sometimes it's really valuable for us as tutors to understand how that student's mind works. And if we're seeing a lot of variability in the results, we're going, okay, that process needs fixing and there's something we can work on with them. So absolutely, if you're under a 35, maybe even under a 30 on the GMAT verbal, you might get some bang for your buck out of the LSATs. Just know that you might find them really, really difficult. And again, that can be a very good thing. Okay. So we are going to do, I think, just one passage today, since this sermon went north of 20 minutes. Apologies for the long-windedness, but I kind of question the value in going over 2 passages today. We've already done 5, I think, so far in this series. We'll just do one more today. All right. So Shovik, if I have not put you to sleep back there, thank you very much. So everybody in the live group, as usual, this is going to be a slightly longer one than we've done in the past few videos, 3 paragraphs. So a little shorter than the LSAT ones. This is still a GMAT passage. So go ahead and take a moment, read this, take your time. And as always, whenever you guys are ready in the live group, just give me a quick little summary, 8 to 12 words, maybe something like that, in what you think the author's goal is here. What's the author's purpose? So go ahead and take a moment. And whenever I'm getting enough action out of the live group, we'll come on back and discuss. Looks like you've got another 20 seconds or so. And if you're just lost, let me know that too, because again, that's helpful for me to see. All right, coming back, everybody. If you're not watching this live, need more time, hit the pause button. Screenshot if you need to. Again, this is one of the harder passages I think that exists, and I don't want to say this in the verbal guide. And I'm seeing a ton of variety here of among the live group. Got about a dozen comments so far, and they are all over the map. Everything from really, really simple and inaccurate, very simple and accurate. I'm seeing some very complicated things that are very accurate, very complicated things that are inaccurate. Yeah, not a shock. Or can they see the screen yet? I'm still seeing the question up there. Awesome. Okay, thank you. So again, the point is never notes exactly. What I'm interested in every single time, and I know I've said this in every video, every passage we've gone through, I'm interested in, are you fighting to figure out, why is this here? Why did the author write it? What does the author want from me? That's what we're chasing. What is the big picture? What's the purpose? And then as you get to the second and subsequent paragraphs, how does the purpose of those paragraphs connect to the previous? That's what you're after. Again, no magic here. Sometimes they really bury that purpose. Sometimes the author makes a very clear statement of his or her point of view. Sometimes the author doesn't. Sometimes it's really hard in that first paragraph to see what's going on. This particular one, man, that first sentence, 46 words, really, really good times. And that really is the heart of it. So it's a really long paragraph, but in that very first sentence, in the current historiography, which is probably not a word most of us use every day, the picture of a consistent, unequivocal decline of women's status with the advent of capitalism and industrialization is giving way to an analysis. Right there, we've kind of got this dichotomy, right? So there's kind of a new versus old, if you want to keep it super, super simple, right? So what's the old view? The old view is that there's a consistent decline, right, in women's status with the advent of capitalism and industrialization. What does the new view do? Well, the current historiography, so you got this new one, that's basically saying, hey, now we're going to emphasize that there's change in continuity. Change in continuity. And also geographical and occupational variation. So put really, really simply, old view. Yeah, women's status was just declining. Capitalism, industrialization, women were going in the tank status-wise. New view, yeah, hey, there's nuance. That's really it. Now, what's all this stuff with Pinchbeck doing here? It's an example, right? And notice right in that, I think in the way we have it on this screen, it's in the fourth line. The history of women's work in English farmhouse cheese making between 1800 and 1930 is a case in point. So the author is being very, very clear here. This is an example of how the new historiography, the newer way of thinking, is emphasizing this nuance. Continuity, change, geographical and occupational variation, and not just this very simplistic view that there's a decline. So this whole business of the cheese making, just an example, really, really critical thing there to catch. So what I don't want to see in your notes, if you're writing stuff out here, and again, notes are a very personal thing. Everybody should be writing different things down based on how your brain works and whether writing actually helps you engage better. If you haven't heard me say that before, go back and watch video number 1 in this series. What I definitely don't really want to see out of anybody here is 8 billion lines of details about what Pinchbeck was saying about cheese. What's the purpose of this paragraph? Set up this dichotomy, give us an example. That's it. Do you want every single detail of that example? It's going to be on the screen if you need it. If they ask you about it later, it's going to be right there for you. All right. Let's go ahead and hit the next paragraph and give you guys a couple minutes. Live group, as soon as you have an idea of what the paragraph is for, what the author's purpose is, go ahead and type something in. If you're just getting obliterated by it, that's great too. Let us know. And apologies again for any name mispronunciations, but Cece, you're killing it. This is great. You know what they say, love stinks. Excellent, Averell. You guys, another 15, 20 seconds. Again, if you're just getting obliterated by this and you're watching live, let us know. Okay, coming back, everybody. Screenshot if you need to. Hit the pause button if you need to, if you're not watching it live. Seeing some great stuff that's super helpful. Again, thank you to everybody participating live. Saw a couple of absolutely fantastic syntheses of what's going on in this paragraph, how it relates to the previous. I'm also seeing some really simplistic ones, and I don't mean to pick on anybody in particular here, so apologies for this. One of the things you want to be really, really careful of, especially if you're pursuing that super, super elite score, is you don't want your analysis of how these paragraphs connect or what the purpose is to be too simple. I'm hearing people say the second paragraph disagrees with the first. Well, what does that mean? Well, the first paragraph is saying, what is the heart of the first paragraph? Why did the author write it? The author's trying to introduce this idea that there was an old way of thinking about all of this, that from 1800 to 1930, there was this consistent, unequivocal decline in women's status as capitalism came about, right? Capitalism and industrialization. Then there's a new way of thinking, the new historiography, where there's nuance, right? There's change, there's continuity, there's geographical and occupational variation. And then you've got all the examples with pinchback. So if you're saying second paragraph disagrees with the first, disagrees with what? Now is saying there is no distinction between old and new. Is that what you mean? So the first paragraph does get into a whole bunch of detail about pinchback kind of in 1930, old view, right? Arguing all these things about this consistent, unequivocal decline, right? So in a sense, the second paragraph disagrees with that, but be really, really careful not to oversimplify, because the most important part of the first paragraph, I'm not sure how you could disagree with it, right? Old view, new view, nothing controversial there. Okay, so what is this paragraph really, really about? So it's basically kind of drawing deeper into this contrast using pinchback as an example. What was pinchback doing? So pinchback was saying, so again, the old, and that's, we'll say Ms. P, was saying that the pre-capitalist, pre-industrial, I'm going to say pre-1800s as a shorthand to save a little bit of space. Pre-1800s was superior for women. And then just in that very first sentence, the recent scholarship questions the notion of the golden age. New questions this golden age. And then goes on to give some detail on that, right? So women's control seldom extended to the disposal of the proceeds of their work. So even in this supposed golden era before 1800, well, it's not like women had complete control over anything either, right? It wasn't so great for women before 1800. And there's the heart of it, right? So just because the women sold the cheese didn't mean they actually got to enjoy the fruits of their labor. So as Cece was saying, marriage is slavery, taken a little bit too far. You want to keep it in their words. In the words of Adam Sandler, love stinks. All right. And very, very clear how this connects, right? Because our framework, the purpose, the heart of that first paragraph, drawing the distinction between old and new. Second paragraph, you could go detail, fact, and you're going to miss the point. Here's what the old guard was thinking, pinchback. Here's what the new people were thinking. Yeah, if you're saying that everything was great pre-1800 and then it fell apart for women, that's not correct. There's a whole lot more going on than that, because pre-1800 wasn't so hot after all. All right, enough of that. Third and final paragraph. Go ahead and take a few minutes, guys. I think you want the passage, not me. wouldn't be a GMATNinja live video without tech glitches. That was a very small one. And once again, I love the honesty. So if you're just getting obliterated, please let me know that too. Excellent. Abijay, CC, Avril, again, apologies for mispronunciations, but you guys are nailing it. Makes me happy. Awesome. Good. Okay, so this paragraph I think is a little bit more straightforward than the other ones. When you look at it in isolation, I think the trick is in connecting it. And I saw some great answers out of the live group, so that's phenomenal. So what's going on here? Again, it feels like it's very anchored in Pinchbeck and what Pinchbeck was saying. And that's true, but where you want to anchor yourself is why? Why is this here? Why are we talking about these particular things with Pinchbeck? And the big key here, you kind of see it in that first sentence, by focusing on somewhat peripheral operations, Pinchbeck missed a substantial element of continuity in women's participation. That's echoing right back to that first paragraph where we see the heart of the passage set up for us. That contrast between the old way of thinking, continual, consistent decline in women's status with the advent of capitalism and industrialization versus the new way of thinking. There's nuance, there's change, there's continuity, there's geographical, occupational variation. So this is all about how Pinchbeck missed all those things, right? So pretty simple here, actually. You could keep this pretty darn short and just say, well, Pinchbeck missed the continuity and also the geographical variation, and that's what you get into later in the paragraph. And there's that reference there at the end to comparing these three divergent developments. So the persistence in English cheese dairying, then it talks about arable agriculture in Southeast England, American cheese dairying, three totally different contexts, and then goes on to say, yeah, some of these elements were lacking. There's a difference between what happened in these different settings. That's exactly the geographic and occupational variation we were talking about from the beginning. I think one of the fundamental, I don't like using the word traps here, but one of the things that can go wrong for you on this passage, if you're not focusing on the big picture, is that most of the text is actually spent on pinchback and what she said in her book and kind of a critique of it, but that's not exactly the point, right? It is all about that framing of, hey, here's the new way, here's the old way. And there's all this language. First paragraph, it says, the history of women's work in English farmhouse cheesemaking is a case in point. The author is very clear that pinchback and English cheesemaking is being used as an example, right towards the top of that first paragraph. Second paragraph, again, there's examples of other scholars' work there in that second paragraph. That second sentence, for example, scholars note that women's control seldom extended to the disposal of the proceeds of their work. So again, the author's being very, very clear that these scholars that are being cited are kind of a way to say, well, hey, this is an example. These are examples of the difference between the old way and the new way of thinking. Fantastic. But again, the part that can be a little bit of a struggle if you're being superficial in your analysis is that, yeah, 70, 80% of the text is about cheese. Passage isn't really about cheese. All right. So what is the passage about? Check out this next question and find out. We'll give you guys a couple minutes. And as soon as you have an answer, as always, please spit that out into the live feed if you're watching this live. And if you're debating between two answer choices and you're watching this live, let us know that. If you have no idea, that's great too. Just let us know. And again, I'm okay if you guys aren't making a choice. If you're down to two, let me know that too. I want to know where your confusion is. Okay, this is great. Come on back, everybody. So yeah, seeing all kinds of stuff. Seeing a lot of B's, C's, E's. People saying they're struggling. I'm seeing some D's in there. I haven't seen a lot of A, but pretty much everything else is great. Means we picked a hard question. Awesome. Told you it's going to be about hard stuff. Okay, primary purpose of the passage. So we just discussed it a moment ago, right? And if you're doing kind of the fundamental process of reading a passage in a really good way, and you're thinking about purpose, and you're thinking about structure, you're thinking about connection, you have a pretty clear idea of the primary purpose of the passage. So again, it's all about sort of setting up that there's this old way of thinking about women's status with the rise of capitalism and industrialization So the old way of thinking was in that period between 1800 and 1930. With the rise of capitalism and industrialization, women's status had a consistent, unequivocal decline. Current historiography, new way of thinking about it, yeah, there's nuance, there's change, there's continuity, there's geographical occupational variation. And then the author is very, very careful to say, yeah, everything that follows is kind of an example. It's not a passage about cheese. It's a passage about these two different ways of thinking about what happened to women's status. So these two different ways of thinking about it among historians, right? Okay. Now, one of the challenges of primary purpose questions is you can be crystal clear about that, and then they phrase it differently, and your head starts to spin. I think that's what I'm seeing with the live group here, because I'm seeing a lot of struggles. And again, it's good on one hand, we picked a good passage. All right, A, present recently discovered evidence that supports a conventional interpretation. Not at all, right? The passage is really about the new way of thinking, makes a whole lot more sense than that old way of thinking. So nothing at all about evidence to support the old conventional way. So A is definitely out. B, here's where it gets fun. Got about a quarter of the answers in the live group. I think we're B. Describe how reinterpretations of available evidence have reinvigorated a once discredited scholarly position. Why is that not right? Well, for starters, where is the discrediting of a scholarly position? There's the old position, unequivocal, consistent decline of women's status with capitalization, industrialization. But there was never any discrediting of this nuanced view. There's just this nuanced view that's evolved, right? Over time. We don't really know where it came from, but scholars have kind of re-examined some stuff and thought through this and gone, no, there's a whole lot more nuance than the early scholars thought. So how have we reinvigorated a once discredited scholarly position? So the position here that's being supported is the new view, right? That's the position that's being supported by the passage, is the new view that there's a lot of nuance. So if that's what we're reinvigorating or supporting, it certainly isn't a formerly discredited position, because there's nothing about that new view ever being discredited. So for that reason, B's out. C, explain why some historians have tended to emphasize change rather than continuity in discussing a particular period. Really interesting. Right here in the beginning, again, that heart of the passage that we get, the author is saying that the new view, that new way of thinking about things, the current historiography, is emphasizing the fact that it's not a really clear thing where women's status is just declining unambiguously. Let's emphasize that there's more going on. There's change and there's continuity. Both of those things happen. There's a lot of geographical variation, occupational variation. So what C makes the mistake of doing is saying that somebody's emphasizing change versus continuity, and that's not the case here at all. The new view, in a way, is emphasizing that both of those things can exist, and it's not just this unequivocal, consistent decline. So C's out. D, explore how changes in a particular occupation serve to counter the prevailing view of a historical period. This one's tempting. I can't blame you guys for liking this a little bit. So explore how changes in a particular occupation. So for starters, I'm going to pause right there. Is that really the heart of it? Are we really that interested in this particular occupation? It's the author's so clear about saying this is an example. Well, it has it right there. Serves to counter the prevailing view of a historical period. Well, what's that prevailing view of a historical period? The prevailing view, previously prevailing view. So right there, I'm a little nervous about C again. Which one is the prevailing view? The author is clear that in the current historiography, the prevailing view is the new one. So right there, I'm a little shaky on what exactly D is referring to, and they say prevailing view. But I guess that's the old prevailing view, that it's just this unequivocal decline, I guess. So changes in the occupation counter that prevailing view? I don't know about that. Is it changes that happened in that occupation that counter the prevailing view? I'm not sure that it's the changes to dairy making that counter that view. The changes to dairy making, you could argue, support the view. It just depends on which changes to dairy making, right? So Pinchbeck's example sort of supports that old view, but again, it's really, really not clear at all what that prevailing view is. So for that reason, I'm not really a fan of D. If you wanted to be conservative, you could keep it in. But I get rid of D for that reason. And then E, examine a particular area of scholarly research, of historical research, in order to exemplify a general scholarly trend. This sounds so vanilla and so boring, you don't want to pick it, right? But man, it's spot on. Examine a particular area of historical research So this whole business of agriculture and women's role in agriculture, in order to exemplify a general scholarly trend, yeah. Notice that this dichotomy that's set up between the old view and the new view is talking about the consistent overall unequivocal decline in women's status in general. New view depends on the occupation, depends on the geography. There's change sometimes, there's continuity sometimes, nuance, right? So we're talking about the general scholarly trend of historiography where we say, hey, look, there's a lot of nuance here. And it's not just that women were unequivocally declining. And so we're examining this particular area of agriculture to exemplify that scholarly trend and say, hey, look how scholars' opinions on this have changed. So that is spot on. All right, that was fun. We're running out of time, so let's do one more. Hey, Shavik, could we please jump ahead to the final question here? It's listed as number 3, about the work of Pinchbeck. Perfect, thank you so much. One last one, and then we're done with the series, folks. You guys, about 10 more seconds. All right, coming back, everybody. See some disagreement here too. Maybe a few more correct answers that I've seen on some of the previous ones. So again, tough passage, chosen deliberately. This is the advanced video. So if you're struggling, getting questions where people say, hey, I feel like I'm doing the process right, but I just don't understand the sentences. Yeah, that's one of the realities. Nobody wants to hear it. Test prep companies don't want to tell you that. Reading skills matter. So if you're struggling to understand this stuff, unfortunately, you just need to do more reading. That's a big part of it, and that takes time, sometimes a lot of time. And I think the question's still up on the screen. Shavik, are you still with us? All right, thank you. So the passage describes the work of Pinchbeck primarily in order to do what? And again, one of the things that I've said throughout this little series, yes, course details matter, but if your goal as you read is just to squeeze the living life out of the details, that's not going to do it for you, because so many of the questions, especially as you get to the higher level, even a question that sounds like it's a detailed question, it's always going to be rooted in some way in the big picture, or almost always. Again, LSAT reflects that really, really well. LSAT doesn't give you a lot of, hey, just read and regurgitate this occasionally, but there's not a lot of that. You got to understand the big picture. Okay, so why is the author describing the work of Pinchbeck? A, to demonstrate that some of the conclusions reached by recent historians were anticipated in earlier scholarship. Certainly not true. There's nothing in the earlier scholarship that is that anticipates what happens in the more recent scholarship. That one's pretty easy to eliminate. And I think pretty much everybody in the live group was picking the other 4 answer choices. B, provide an instance of a viewpoint that according to the passage's author is being superseded. I saw a couple of really good comments from the live group. I don't like B. I don't understand B. Cool, well, keep it. If you're not sure about it, just keep it. Be conservative on that first pass, because maybe you'll look at it later and it'll make more sense to you. What do I think of it? Provide an instance of the viewpoint that is being superseded. Sure, Pinchbeck's view is it's this very one-dimensional, simple thing, consistent, unequivocal decline of women's status. You see that in She's Making, according to Pinchbeck. And the author's saying, no, that's being superseded by this more nuanced view that depends on geography and occupation. So fair enough, B's looking pretty good. C, illustrate the ways in which recent historians have built on the work of their predecessors. Not really. So how are the current historians building on the work of Pinchbeck? They're kind of arguing against her, right? They're saying that's too simple of a view. We need much more nuance here. Wouldn't really say that that's building on the previous work. Certainly not why we're talking about Pinchbeck. We're using it as kind of a counterpoint example of that old view. So C's out. D, provide a point of reference for subsequent scholarship on women's work during the agricultural revolution. Yeah, that's true to a degree, right? It's a point of reference. So Pinchbeck is sort of one point of reference on what the old guard thought about women's status during the rise of capitalism and industrialization. But is this really the heart of it? I'm not really sure that that's why it's there. It's kind of there as a counterpoint. It's there to exemplify the old view. The little issue I have here, provide a point of reference for subsequent scholarship on women's work during the agricultural revolution. Now, there's the problem. We're talking about during the industrial revolution, right? Or the rise of capitalism and industrialization, not during the agricultural revolution, really. So D is super, super shaky there. Get rid of that. And E, show the effect that specialization introduced in the agricultural, let me try that again. Show the effect that the specialization introduced in the agricultural and industrial revolutions had on women's work. Not exactly, right? So we're not just kind of saying, hey, Pinchbeck, show us what the effect was that these industrializations had on women's work. Again, what's the heart of the passage? What's the purpose? What is it all about? It's that dichotomy that we start with, old view versus new view among these scholars. That's why that first paragraph was written. Everything else connects back up to it. So is the purpose to show what happened to women's work, just women's work? No. We're talking about a scholarly debate in the field and how the field itself has evolved. So for that reason, again, E's not wrong. Is the passage doing that? We could argue that it kind of is. But is that why we're talking about Pinchbeck? Not at all. That really isn't it at all. Okay, tricky. And B is your winner. Tough stuff. Sorry, I'm getting marriage proposals on the live feed. Thank you so much, everybody. And again, live crowd in particular, thank you so much for joining us. We're filming this during, let's see, we're 3 months in. I've been in lockdown for about 12 weeks here, barely left my home. Pregnant wife. So being extra careful. So it's great to have a couple hundred people here giving us crap, making Adam Sandler jokes, throwing popcorn, marriage proposals at me. So thank you, everybody, for joining us live. So last few things, MBA Spotlight next week. If you're watching this live, we're going to be doing all kinds of panels, all kinds of good stuff. Come visit gmatclub.com, sign up. Going to be doing some live stuff on YouTube. I'll be doing a couple of the panels, be moderating a little bit, a couple good ones, day in the life of MBA students, moderating a panel on diversity, one of my favorite topics. So come join us for those and smash that subscribe button, smash that like button. It helps more people to see our content. If you want GMAT Ninja specific videos, all the ones I do on GMAT Club, live, interactive, we've got some nicely produced ones, not very many, not as glorious as what we have on the GMAT Club channel. Come see us on the GMAT Ninja Tutoring YouTube channel and come see us on the forums. You got questions about stuff verbal, tag me at GMAT Ninja. Got questions on quant, go tag that amazing mutant Buñuel, Bunuel. He's a mutant. He's amazing. Tag him. Come see us. Come interact with us. Help us stop from being lonely here doing COVID. So thank you, everybody, for joining us. And now we get to my favorite part of the video, where I stand here with a dumb look on my face until the live feed goes off. So again, thank you, everybody. Be safe out there.